Good evening. My name is Nina Reichner, and I'm a graduate student with Liberty University, currently completing my master's in public health with a concentration in global health. And tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my practicum experience within the West Pharmaceutical Services in the St. Petersburg and Clearwater, Florida facilities, and focusing on the reduction of aluminum slivers to improve patient safety. If you move your attention to slide 2, it focuses on the purpose and the design of this practicum experience, with the purpose primarily being to improve patient safety through the reduction of aluminum slivers during the manufacturing process. A little background on this facility is they manufacture the aluminum caps that would be crimped on top of vials for injectable medications and injectable therapies. Specifically for this practicum, we're focusing on the COVID vaccination. So we're looking primarily at the 13 millimeter aluminum shells in that manufacturing process. So the aluminum slivers do run the risk of contaminating the sterile injectable medications, which can negatively impact the patient safety concerning the COVID vaccines. And most recently, there was a recall in Japan, was not related to the West manufacturing processes, where there was metal particulate found inside some of the COVID vaccines, and it did cause some supply chain issues. So some of the design behind this practicum, so we utilized the evidence-based approach through quantitative data analysis of historical data. The historical data looked at internal rejections, supplier rejections, customer complaints, product recalls, and employee interviews. And then the pre and post practicum intervention strategies were statistically analyzed using the internal rejection and employee interviews concerning quality culture. So some of the key accomplishments, if you turn your attention to slide 3, focusing on improved communication. So communication was the biggest improvement that we did notice across the 3-month practicum intervention. With the improved communication, directly noted an increase in operator engagement, as well as an improved investigation methodologies. With those improved investigations, that was primarily focused through the cause and effect diagrams, which we did initiate through the slivers. And then with those, the learnings and lessons learned out of the sliver investigations and cause and effect diagrams were reapplied to other types of visual defects. With those improved methods, we did see a 15% reduction of internal rejections, with a resultant improved patient safety. There were no recalls and 0 customer complaints concerning any type of particulate, and specifically focusing on the metal particulate or metal slivers that could be created during the stamping process. Looking at slide 3, so 2 of the key accomplishments to come out of this, the first one being that every seal has a name. So what we primarily did is we took the visual defect, in this case, the aluminum slivers. We had a photo of the slivers, and then we attributed it back to the end use, so how it's going to actually impact the patient or the customer. So in this case, we focused with the 13 millimeter shells. So 2 of the primary injectable therapies used for this type of product was focusing on the COVID vaccine, as well as some chemotherapy drugs. So really trying to drive it home on the shop floor level for the employees to understand how every role within the organization does play a role on the drug, and the end user being the patient. So in this case, we focus very heavily on the story behind one dose and how that impacts whether it be the employee, their neighbor, their pet, or relative. And then another significant accomplishment that we made is we implemented control limits. So what we had previously had, and working with quality operations, specification limits are a big thing, especially concerning customer requirements and quality agreements. For example, for the aluminum slivers, focusing on that portion, we had a specification limit where we would accept 3 and reject at 4, and that would be the entire batch. And that batch size could range from 2,000 pieces to over 1 billion parts. So the implementation of the control limits allows us to escalate issues before it reaches that specification limit and reject the batch. So in this case, for the slivers, we implemented the control limit to accept 2 and reject at 3. And while we did not reject the batch, it created an escalation process to take a more of a proactive approach, and then increasing the working time and the communication between the quality operations, the operational team, and the tool room and engineering. Some of the recommendations, if you turn your attention to slide 4, focuses really on the further development of the cause and effect diagrams. So the cause and effect diagrams, we use the basic fishbone, focusing on the man, method, measurement, machine, environment, and the materials itself. So with the cause and effect, we had a relatively small group. Well, it was a cross-functional, interprofessional team. It could have been further analyzed by a more technical group if we would have pulled in some of the tooling engineers outside of just the normal day-to-day operations. Another recommendation is focusing on the improved utilization of statistical process controls, so the SPC, to further assist in the problem solving for visual, functional, or dimensional types of defects. Currently, the West facility, we use Infinity QS, which as our SPC software. And one thing that we did with this project was we implemented a visual standard. So essentially, as the technicians and the operators on the floor, as they're entering their dimensional rounds, they're also entering their rounds for their visual inspection. Previously, that was only documented on the actual hard copy documents. So putting that into the SBC software allows us to have more of a real-time tracking and trending. So while it's very in its infancy, we are noticing some very significant trends and then aligning those back to our internal rejections, so then we can reassess where some of our resource allocation is going. And then some of the lessons learned, so the biggest lesson learned for me as well as for the site is the impact of effective visual aids and employee communications, and allowing effective employee communication forums, and how they're critical components of improving the facility's quality culture. So just on the operator and employee interviews, 64% of the interviewed employees felt that quality issues were not effectively communicated. And 60% of those interviewed employees did not understand how their role directly impacts the quality of the product and how it impacts the patient or the end use. So with that, a lot of the things that we did implement, so the visual aids, focusing on when to cut the coil, different types of defects, the out of control versus specification limits, and the biggest thing being that every seal has a name. That was a big win as far as it was the employees who essentially came up with the ideas. And that's really the biggest takeaway, is getting everyone involved at all levels within the organization to kind of help understand what the issues are, and then coming up with some of the most effective methods of how to improve those things is communication. Communication is a thing where all organizations have issues with it, but it's a matter of finding the right group of people coming together to kind of lay out the whole structure and then putting effective plans in place. And then kind of, in addition to that, the lesson learned kind of for future research. So some of the things that I might have done differently is extending the length of the intervention strategies to measure the change in employee perception of the quality culture and patient safety. While the pre and the post, doing a two sample t-test did prove that it was statistically insignificant, I really associate that with a 3-month time span, and it also fell within the time for October, where we do a quality culture week. So there was a lot of other initiatives going on at the site level, and that may have had an impact, whether positive or negative, on the results, but just the overall time frame was probably the biggest limitation. And then something else to do differently and for future research is to increase the focus on the tooling components and the stamping die preventative maintenance. While my intervention strategies focus primarily on the creation and training of visual aids, focusing on harmonized inspection methods, there's a lot of work that can be done as far as the tooling components and what those components are made out of, and following the preventative maintenance schedules. And then some of the challenges that were not anticipated focused on the impact of production volumes on internal rejections for our baseline results. So the baseline results were put together over a 3-year historical time frame, and over the last roughly 14 to 16 months due to COVID, the West sites in St. Petersburg and Clearwater, Florida have seen roughly 40% increase in volume. So while we only noticed a 15% improvement on internal rejections, if we were to have calculated out the comparison of production volumes 3 years ago with the rejections compared to the increase in volume now in the internal rejections, that may have slightly skewed the data. And then another challenge was just really the limited engagement. So with the staffing shortages, especially for some of the auxiliary groups, being in the process engineering and the tooling group, limited engagement as far as from the employee interviews when we were out on the shop floor, and then during the cause and effect brainstorming sessions for the slivers. So we had several different brainstorming events, and then with just different schedules, people kind of popping in and out. So if we would have had a little bit more time, it probably wouldn't have prevented as much of a challenge. But overall, it was a very great and rewarding experience, and then really driving back home again that effective communication and visual aids, which we can reapply for every portion of the organization. All right, and then if you turn your attention to slide 7, being the final slide, really just kind of ties it all back home, and really being the story of one dose, and how something so small as the aluminum shell can play such a huge role in COVID vaccine and for future medical therapies. All right, thank you.